So today we're going to try and find out what was the worst meta of all time in Valorant's history. And to do that, we've made a tier list just here. And we're not going to go through every single meta in Valorant's history. We're just going to go through some notable bad offenders. Now, I do need to say that I haven't been playing the game since it very first came out. I actually joined the game around about when Astra was coming out, so I did actually miss out on some of these metas, but I've gone back and kind of thought about, how that would have been to play with and against, and we are going to rate it here on the tier list with 5 different tiers. The top one being die, a slow and painful death, that being the worst thing that can happen. The second worst thing that can happen to anyone, though, is listening to Coldplay, then a wasp attack, then we start to get to, talking to strangers, where it's it's probably not great, but maybe it's not too bad depending on who the strangers are. And then at the end, you've got winning £1 on a £1 scratch card, where, you've just wasted my time, basically, right? It wasn't that bad, but I didn't win anything, didn't lose anything, but you just wasted my time. So let's begin, and we'll begin right at the very start of the game with the Raze meta, where Raze, if you don't know, used to have 2 nades, blast packs that cost less, everything cost less back then, and did more damage and were crazy. She had a boombot which dealt more damage and obviously lasted the 10 seconds as well, which was crazy. The showstopper used to only cost 6 ult points at the very, very start, which was crazy. And so yeah, Raze, basically everything about Raze's kit got nerfed at one point or another from the very start of the game. And if you go back to the very first patch notes I could find from the 21st of April 2020, Valorant patch notes 0.47 plus, this is what you got, where Raze, the paint shells got reduced from 2 to 1, and they now had a kill reset instead, which, yeah, is good. And then further nerfs would come later down the line. So, where would I rate Raze on this list? Well, as I said, I didn't actually play with or against this version of Raze, but if this version of Raze came out today, it probably still would be the strongest agent in the game, to be honest. And so that's not ideal. And, well, I do think that there is one thing going for this, that I imagine playing with Raze was pretty fun, so I'm going to put Raze in listening to Coldplay, where I assume if you were playing Raze, you probably were having a decent time, but playing against Raze probably was not that fun at all. And so yeah, let's put Raze in listening to Coldplay. Okay, next up we have what I'm going to call the Sentinel Meta. And I've got a picture here of Killjoy and Cypher swapping hats, but if you want to, you can also include Sage in this, because Sage was pretty strong early on in the game as well. But for those of you who don't know, basically Sentinel utility didn't used to, deactivate if the Sentinel had died. So, if you put down Sentinel utility, if you put down a Cypher trip and Cypher dies, the trip is still there for the rest of the team, which is kind of crazy to think about. There was also other things where, if Cypher would pick up that tripwire, he wouldn't have to buy it for the next round either. And so we entered a meta where the game, was dominated by Sentinels. Killjoy also came out as a very strong agent and had to be nerfed in multiple ways as well. And those nerfs started to come in around patch 1.11 when Sky came out, and you could see, yeah, Trapwire disabled and revealed upon death, unlike before. And you've got Killjoy, didn't have a deactivation range either. So Killjoy was like Cypher, where you could go across the map as well. And, you see we start getting a bunch of nerfs, and I think there was further nerfs as well. So we entered a very, very slow meta dominated by the Sentinel class. Now, again, I wasn't actually here to play in that time, but that sounds pretty bad, to be honest, to, just be dominated by Sentinels, everything be super slow. Yeah, this doesn't sound like a great time, so I'm also going to put this in listening to Coldplay. And next up, we come to the first gun meta, which is the Frenzy Stinger meta. Now, this is being represented by just the Frenzy because we have a separate Stinger meta to talk about. But with this Frenzy Stinger meta, basically, the early rounds of a game were just dominated by the Frenzy and Stinger. Stinger was a super really good gun, and pistol rounds, you could buy a Frenzy and light shields if you wanted to. You could just forego utility. What is utility? We're just going to play with Frenzy light shields instead, and so often the early rounds in the game just would be frenzies and stingers for those first couple rounds until the rifles would come out. Now, this got fixed in patch 2.03, where the stinger got quite a few different nerfs, as you can see just there, and the frenzy cost also went from 400 to 500 as well. So they did eventually get around to fixing this, but this was a big part of the meta for a while. So people running around like headless chickens with frenzies and stingers, honestly, that doesn't sound too bad to me overall, but I imagine after a certain amount of time, it would become quite grating and feel just a bit like, I saw a lot of things about pros calling it very coin flippy and whatnot, which I can definitely probably see why they would think that. And so I'm going to put this in Wasp Attack. But then we come to perhaps an even more infamous gun meta, which was the Bucky Meta. Now, for those of you, and this is where I start to come into the game, and I was actually around for the tail end of the Bucky Meta. For those of you who don't know, the Bucky, for whatever reason, they decided was a shotgun, which on its right click was also a sniper rifle. Now, the Bucky right click right now is absolute trash, and that's for good reason, because back in the day, the Bucky right click was just a completely different beast. And any of you who played during that time will absolutely know what I'm talking about. It just seemed to kill people at any range. Like, this gun was basically a shotgun and a rifle, but also an eco weapon. Eco rounds were just dominated by the Bucky. And I can distinctly remember running into people with 5 Buckies and dying from very, very far distances away and being like, what is going on? Why is this shotgun so good? But then finally in patch 2.06, they did decide, well, yeah, let's fix this. I mean, look at this for a nerf. Reduce the amount of pellets in a right-click shot from 15 to 5, right? So you're getting a third of the pellets. For those of you who don't know how it works, basically, you get damage per pellet in shotguns. So from going from 15 to 5 in a right-click, yeah, that is like probably one of the biggest nerfs, if not the biggest nerf they have ever given to any one thing in the game, and for good reason. And so the Bucky meta, it's kind of funny to look back upon now, but genuinely during the time, had this, stuck around for all the way until now, people would just think that this is the worst thing that ever happened. I am going to put it in dying a slow and painful death, because it wasn't fun to necessarily do either. It was just stupid. Everything about it was just stupid. It wasn't fun to play with, and it was horrific to play against. And so, yeah, Bucky meta, I hope they never change the right click again. Let it be useless. Honestly, let it die. But now let's return to some agents, and we'll talk about the Astra Viper meta. Now, for those of you who don't know, Viper started off the game pretty bad, but slowly but surely started to get better and better as they incrementally buffed her until she was very, very strong indeed. And then Astra came out as well, and Astra was kind of busted off the rip with slower cooldowns, the 5 stars as well. Just truly kind of insane when she first came out, and basically Astra and Viper dominated much of the pro scene for quite some time. Now this one was kind of fixed when they did a bunch of controller changes in patch 4.04, where they nerfed Astra pretty heavily. One of kind of the biggest, I think, just in one go nerfs that they had done to any agent before with Astra there, and Viper also had some pretty significant nerfs as well. So where do we rank the Astra Viper meta? Well, a lot of people will say that this was one of the worst metas in the game. It was slow, it was boring, it was baiting out utility, all that kind of stuff. I actually tend to disagree a bit for a couple of reasons. One, Astra wasn't actually seen in lower ranks that much at all, because she was quite a complex agent which required coordination and teamwork, which at lower ranks, is non-existent. So, you actually wouldn't see that much Astra for, if you were playing in most ranks, you probably didn't actually see that much Astra. But at the top level, a lot of pros would say, yeah, it was just about baiting out stars and all that kind of stuff and whatnot, which is true, right? That's absolutely true. But I actually think there was a lot of complexity to Astra, right? There was a lot of different things that you could do with Astra, would kind of open up your options to good Astra players. So it wasn't a good meta, don't get me wrong, but I actually don't think it was as bad as people think. And so for that reason, I think I'm going to put it in Wasp Attack. Next, we have the Sova Jet meta, which honestly perhaps started even before the Astra Viper meta did, but lasted even longer, right? This was around for such a long time, to be honest, where basically Jet and Sova were common picks on pretty much every map outside of maybe 1 or 2 for Sova. Now, the reason that these two were so strong is because they were pretty unique at the time. Jet was just basically the best opping agent by far in the game at the time, and had no real direct competition, and therefore playing Jet just made sense. And Sova had no direct competition either in terms of being revealed. Turns out being revealed and knowing where someone is perfectly with perfect information, yeah, that's pretty strong. And so these two would basically dominate the game because they were just kind of uniquely positioned to do stuff which was very strong. And this meta kind of truly met its end around patch 4.08, where they finally decided to really change the Jet tailwind here, the E, where it is what it is today, rather than just being able to dash at any point. Sova also got some nerfs, but I think I'm going to put this in the Talking to Strangers. The reason I'm going to put this in Talking to Strangers is although this lasted for a super long time, and Jet and Sova's pick rates were really high pretty much, throughout the game, pretty much everywhere you went, it was still actually not that bad, and it was quite fun. You know, there's plenty of moments of Jets popping off that are quite fun, to be honest. Like, you know, Jet is an agent that's pretty fun to play, and arguably was even more fun to play back then when she was kind of strong. And so, you know, yeah, this lasted a long time, but as far as metas go, I think most people would probably agree this wasn't as bad as it could have been. Next, we come to Chamber and the Chamber meta, and obviously this one I don't really need to talk about too much. Most of you probably have experienced the Chamber meta watching this video, and so you'll know that basically after that Jet nerf that we just talked about, Chamber kind of stepped in and became just the agent in the game that was played on pretty much every single map, in pretty much every single situation, in pro lobbies, in bronze lobbies, whatever it was. You were going to see Chamber, and you were going to fear Chamber. And Chamber got multiple nerfs, but it wasn't really until this in patch 5.12 where they changed really how the rendezvous worked that Chamber actually saw a big decline in play. They tried nerfing him, you know, multiple times, but they finally hit the thing which actually mattered, and it finally decided that Chamber was no longer going to be dominating the game. Now, unlike Jet, Chamber wasn't fun. There was nothing fun about Chamber whatsoever. You know, you just had to press one button and you were gone. It was very, very dull. Everything was dull about the Chamber meta. You know, I had stats, and the stats do say that, you know, at least in pro play, the Chamber meta wasn't maybe as you know, dominant as people think, you know, right? Chamber's non-mirrors win rates perhaps weren't as high as you would maybe expect for an agent that's getting picked all the time, but still, he was still super boring and super dull, and after a while, it just got so tiresome that, yeah, this wasn't a great meta. I don't think it's, like, the worst that has ever happened in the game, but I'll put him in listening to Coldplay. And then finally, we come to the most recent Stinger meta. Now, this one didn't last too long, or at least I don't think we saw the full fruits of this coming about. But we did start to see some teams notice that, hey, this Stinger is kind of busted. And, well, we started to see teams like 100 Thieves force on defensive side. After losing the pistol, they would still force Stingers, right? Because they just found out, hey, the Stinger is still just a really, really good gun. And your chances of winning are still good enough. And so it kind of changed the way the game was played. And, yeah, the Stinger was just a bit too good. This one did get fixed, though, in patch 6.02, and as I said, I don't think that we really saw the full fruits of the Stinger meta. You know, it kind of got nerfed just as I think the kind of mainstream, everyone kind of was realizing that the Stinger is really busted and everyone was going to start using it, then it kind of got nerfed. We didn't get like a super long period of Stinger dominance. And for that reason, the Stinger probably wasn't the most oppressive thing that's ever been in the game, and it didn't last that long either. So I'm going to put Stinger in the winning £1 on a £1 scratch card. I didn't mind it too much. And so that is my list of the different metas in this game. Let me know if you have anything else you would add to the list as well, or where you would put these different options. Let me know in the comments down below for what do you think was the worst Valorant meta of all time.